You're sitting in a cafe and your eyes drift to a couple 2 tables away. They're not talking, no dramatic gestures, no obvious tension, but you notice something. The way he slowly moves his coffee cup a few inches closer to hers. Most people would call this people watching, but you're not just watching. You are feeling the entire story between them without a single word being said. And here's the part no one tells you. This isn't just a personality quirk. It means your brain has been trained to look for what most people miss, the unspoken, the subtle, the emotional undercurrent beneath everything. And that's exactly why your continue watching list looks the way it does. Because loving K-dramas isn't random. It reveals something deeper about how you experience the world and yourself. Let's see which one explains you. The Silent Volcano. Put you in a high-pressure situation, a funeral, a confrontation, a room where everyone else is losing control, and somehow you're the calm one. While people are raising their voices, over-explaining themselves, or panicking internally, you're just there, steady, focused, breathing normally like you didn't just walk into emotional chaos. If this were a movie, you'd be the character everyone looks at and thinks, wow, they've really got it together. Composed, controlled, almost unreadable. But inside, yeah, it's not that peaceful. It's more like 10 different emotions trying to speak at the same time. Frustration, sadness, empathy, maybe even a little anger, but all of it organized, contained, managed like a professional-level system. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be this way. At some point in your life, you realized that showing too much wasn't always safe. Maybe it made things worse. Maybe people didn't understand. Maybe it was just easier to deal with things quietly. So you adapted, not by shutting down, but by getting really, really good at holding everything together. And here's the part most people don't realize. That's not emotional weakness. That's emotional control on a very high level. You can sit in uncomfortable situations without exploding. You can process intense feelings without making everything about you. You can stay rational when others are overwhelmed. That's rare. Like, people secretly rely on you more than they admit rare. And this is exactly why K-dramas hit you differently. Because when that character, after 10 episodes of holding everything in, finally breaks down, that scene doesn't just make you sad. It feels like pressure being released from your own chest. It's like your brain goes, oh, we're allowed to feel this now? Great. And suddenly you're tearing up over someone else's life like it's your own. Not because you're overly emotional, but because you've been carrying more than you let people see. So no, you're not too much. If anything, you've just mastered the art of being just enough on the outside while managing a whole world on the inside. And honestly, that's a quiet kind of strength most people never develop. The hunger for something real. Think about the last time you tried to say something that actually mattered. Not small talk, not what are you doing later. Something real. Maybe you opened up a little, shared a thought, a feeling, something that took at least a bit of courage to send. And then you got back a dry reply, a short message, an emoji that somehow made things worse instead of better. LOL. Nice. And that's it. It doesn't seem like a big deal on the surface. You don't make a scene, you don't call it out, but it lingers. There's this quiet feeling of, that wasn't it. Like you reached out for something real and touched plastic. Because what you're actually craving isn't attention, it's presence. The kind of presence where someone is there with you, where they listen, where they respond with intention, where you don't feel like you're talking into a void with Wi-Fi. And in a world that runs on fast replies, short attention spans, and half-focused conversations, you're wired differently. You look for depth, not in a dramatic, life is a movie way, but in a grounded, very real way. You notice effort. You value consistency. You pay attention to how people show up, not just what they say. And here's the interesting part. That's actually a huge advantage, because while a lot of people are building connections that are quick but fragile, you're naturally drawn to the kind that last. You're the type of person who remembers details others forget, checks in when it actually matters, doesn't disappear when things get slightly uncomfortable. That makes you reliable. And in today's world, that's basically a superpower. Now enter K-dramas. They don't just entertain you, they mirror what you've been looking for. People who wait, people who show up, people who don't vanish the second things get complicated. Someone stands in the rain for hours just to apologize, and instead of thinking, that's unrealistic, a part of you thinks, finally, someone gets it. Because it's not about the grand gesture, it's about what the gesture represents. Effort, commitment, emotional presence, things that feel rare. So no, you're not watching these stories to escape reality. You're watching them because they reflect a version of connection that actually makes sense to you. It's recognition, a reminder that the way you value people, the way you show up, the way you care isn't too much. It's just not common. And yes, there's a downside. You might get frustrated with low-effort interactions. You might lose interest quickly when something feels shallow. You might even feel like you're asking for more than people are willing to give. But here's the truth most people don't say out loud. You're not asking for too much. You're just asking the wrong people. Because when you do find someone who matches that level of presence, everything feels easier. Conversations flow. Effort feels natural, not forced. And suddenly, you're not intense. You're understood. So that hunger you feel, it's not a flaw. It's a filter. It keeps out what's empty and pulls you closer to what's actually real. The Subtext Reader. You've probably heard someone say, "I'm fine," and instantly knew they weren't. Not because of the words, not because they gave you some long explanation, but because of something small. A pause that lasted just a second too long, a slight shift in tone, the way they looked away right after saying it, like their eyes didn't want to be part of the lie. Most people miss that. They hear the sentence, accept it, and move on, but you don't. Your brain kind of zooms in. Not in a dramatic detective with a magnifying glass way. You're not out here solving crimes over lunch. It's quieter than that. More intuitive. You just feel when something is off. You pick up on the gap between what someone says and what they actually mean. And that ability, it's a big deal. Because it means you're not easily fooled by surface-level communication. You don't just react, you interpret. You read situations with more depth than most people even realize exists. In practical terms, that gives you a serious advantage. You can sense tension in a room before it explodes. You notice when someone needs support even if they never ask for it. You can tell when something feels genuine and when it's just performance. That saves you from a lot of misunderstandings. And let's be honest, it also saves you from a lot of questionable people. Because when something feels off, you don't ignore it. You might not always act on it immediately, but you register it. That alone puts you ahead of most. Now, here's where K-dramas come in. They don't spoon-feed emotions. They stretch them out. A conversation that could take 30 seconds turns into a full minute of silence. A look that most shows would skip becomes the entire scene. And instead of getting bored, you lock in. Because that's where the real story is. In the hesitation, in the eye contact, in what's not being said. Over time, watching this kind of storytelling does something interesting to you. You stop just hearing words. You start noticing patterns. The way someone avoids a topic, the way their tone changes around certain people, the way silence sometimes says more than a full paragraph. And once you start seeing that layer, it's hard to go back. Regular conversations can feel a bit obvious, like you're reading subtitles while also watching the hidden version of the scene at the same time. And again, this isn't overthinking, it's awareness. You're tuned in to emotional nuance. That makes you a better listener, a better friend, someone people feel understood by, even if they don't fully know why. Of course, there's a small downside. You might notice things you wish you didn't. You might read between lines that others prefer to keep blurry. But overall, this ability gives you clarity in a world full of mixed signals. While others are confused, you're already picking up the pattern. While others take words at face value, you're reading the intention behind them. And that's powerful, because once you understand what's really being communicated, you stop reacting to noise and start responding to truth. The architect of the slow burn. Most people want things fast. Fast results, fast relationships, fast answers. If it takes too long, they assume something's wrong, or worse, they lose interest. But you're built a little differently. You don't just tolerate the slow build, you actually prefer it. You're the kind of person who doesn't mind when the main characters don't confess their feelings until episode 11. In fact, if they kissed in episode 2, you'd probably think, okay, but what are we supposed to watch for the next 14 episodes? You enjoy the tension, the almosts, the pauses, the moments where something is clearly happening, even if no one is saying it out loud. Because to you, that's where things feel real. Anyone can rush into something, anyone can get quick results. But when something takes time, when it builds slowly, layer by layer, that's different. That means something is actually developing beneath the surface. And this mindset doesn't stay on your screen. It shows up in your life. You're not someone who gives up easily. You don't expect instant mastery, instant connection, or instant clarity. You're willing to invest time into things that matter: careers, relationships, personal growth. You understand that meaningful things take time to form, and that gives you a massive advantage. While others jump from thing to thing chasing quick wins, you're building something stable. While others get frustrated and quit halfway, you stay long enough to see real progress. You're patient in a world that rewards speed, but often lacks depth. And that patience, it compounds. Because over time, the people who stick with things usually end up further ahead than the ones who rush. There's also something else. You don't just chase results, you pay attention to the journey. You notice small improvements. You appreciate subtle changes. You actually enjoy the process instead of just trying to get through it. That makes life feel less like a checklist and more like an experience. And honestly, that's a rare skill. Now, of course, there is a small catch. Sometimes that same patience can turn into waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to finally show up the way you hope they will, waiting for something to naturally evolve, when in reality, it's not going anywhere. And because you believe in the slow build, you might stay a little longer than you should, not because you're naive, but because you see potential. You see what could happen if things just had more time. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. So the real balance for you is knowing the difference between something that is growing slowly and something that is simply not growing at all. Because once you learn that, your patience stops being a risk and becomes one of your strongest advantages. You don't rush, you don't force, you don't settle for something shallow just because it's quick. You build things that last. And in a world addicted to speed, that kind of mindset quietly wins.
The meaning seeker. You notice things, small things, a gesture, a sentence someone almost didn't say, the timing of something that felt just a little too perfect to be random. Like when you run into the exact person you were thinking about, right after you decided you were over it. Or when someone sends a message at the exact moment you needed it, even if they had no idea. Most people brush those moments off. Just coincidence, just timing, doesn't mean anything. But you pause. Not in a dramatic conspiracy theory way, but in a quiet, curious way. Because to you, things don't feel entirely meaningless. there's always this subtle question in the back of your mind. Why did that happen like that? And that mindset? It's not overthinking, it's pattern awareness. You're naturally wired to connect dots, emotionally, socially, even symbolically. You don't just experience moments, you interpret them. And that's a powerful advantage. Because while other people move quickly from one thing to the next, you extract meaning. You learn faster from experiences, you remember moments more vividly. You build a deeper understanding of people and situations over time. It's like you're not just living life, you're reading it at the same time. Now, K-dramas take this tendency and turn it all the way up. They don't treat moments as random, they build them. A shared umbrella isn't just about rain, it's about closeness. A simple meal isn't just food, it's connection. A delayed message isn't just bad timing, it's emotional tension. Everything carries weight, everything points to something. And the more you watch that kind of storytelling, the more your brain starts applying that same lens to real life. Suddenly, you're not just noticing what happened, you're noticing how it happened, when it happened, what it might represent. And instead of life feeling like a series of disconnected events, it starts to feel like a narrative. Not a perfectly written one, but one that still has direction, themes, and meaning. That changes how you move through the world. You become more intentional, more reflective, more aware of the impact of small actions, both yours and other people's. You don't just react, you consider. And that makes your decisions more aligned with what actually matters to you. Of course, there's a small downside. Sometimes you might look for meaning where there isn't any. You might replay moments trying to understand them a little too deeply. But overall, this mindset adds depth to your life. While others rush past moments, you absorb them. While others forget quickly, you carry lessons forward. You don't just collect experiences, you collect meaning. And over time, that builds something most people don't even realize they're missing. A sense that your life isn't random, but connected, layered, and slowly unfolding into something you're still learning how to understand.
The intentional romantic. You know life isn't a movie. You pay bills, you deal with traffic. You've seen enough to know people can be inconsistent, distracted, and sometimes just not great at communication. You understand how messy reality can be, and yet you still choose to see something more in it. Not in a delusional, everything is perfect kind of way. You're not walking around expecting background music to start playing when you enter a room, although that would help sometimes. You're aware of reality. You just refuse to experience it in the most boring way possible, because at some point you realized something powerful. Life doesn't just depend on what happens, it depends on how you frame what happens. Two people can live the exact same day, same routine, same tasks, same environment, and experience it completely differently. One sees repetition, the other sees rhythm. And you lean toward the second one. So you add meaning where there isn't any. You turn routines into rituals. Making coffee isn't just making coffee, it's your 5-minute reset before the day starts. Walking home isn't just walking, it's your moment to think, decompress, or just exist without noise. Even something small, like choosing what to wear, becomes a way to express how you want to feel. You're not just going through life, you're shaping how it feels. And that's a huge advantage, because while a lot of people are stuck waiting for big moments to feel alive, you're creating small ones consistently. You don't need a vacation to feel something different. You don't need a major life change to shift your mood. You've built the ability to generate meaning on your own. That gives you emotional independence. It also makes you more resilient, because when things get boring, repetitive, or even a little heavy, you don't automatically feel trapped. You adjust the lens. You find something to appreciate, something to focus on, something to make the moment feel slightly better than it would have otherwise. That doesn't mean you ignore reality. You still see problems, you still deal with responsibilities, but you don't let those things define the entire experience. And that's the difference. Now, K-dramas definitely play a role here. They take ordinary situations and elevate them. A quiet walk becomes emotional. A simple conversation becomes memorable. Even silence feels intentional. And without realizing it, you start doing the same thing. You begin to notice atmosphere, mood, the feeling of a moment, not just the facts. And that makes your life feel richer. More cinematic, sure, but also more alive. Of course, there's a small downside. Sometimes reality doesn't match the version you imagined. Sometimes people don't show up with the same energy you bring. And yeah, that can be a little disappointing. But even then, you don't lose the ability. Because this isn't about expecting life to be perfect. It's about choosing not to experience it in grayscale. So no, you're not naive. You're intentional. You're someone who understands that meaning isn't always found. Sometimes it's created. And in a world where most people are just reacting to life as it happens, you're quietly redesigning how it feels to live it.
The mirror effect. Sometimes you're watching a character make a frustrating decision. They're being stubborn, prideful, completely blind to something that feels painfully obvious to you. And you catch yourself reacting. Maybe you sigh. Maybe you pause the episode. Like, seriously, we're doing this again? Maybe you even talk to the screen like you've been personally affected. And it's not just annoyance. It's something a little deeper. That subtle discomfort. That internal reaction you can't fully explain. Because deep down, it feels familiar. Not in a dramatic, life-changing realization kind of way, more like a quiet, uncomfortable recognition. Like, wait, have I done that? And that's the part most people miss. You're not just watching characters, you're seeing reflections. You don't just connect with their story, you recognize pieces of yourself inside their behavior. The way they avoid difficult conversations, the way they hold onto pride a little too long, the way they misinterpret something and spiral instead of asking directly. It hits differently because it's not random. It's relatable. And here's where this becomes a huge advantage, because most people go through life repeating patterns without ever noticing them. Same reactions, same mistakes, same outcomes, over and over again. But you get previews. You see those patterns played out on screen, compressed, exaggerated, easier to spot. And that gives you something rare, awareness without immediate pressure. K-dramas become a kind of safe space, a place where you can observe behaviors, emotions, and decisions without having to defend yourself, without having to justify anything, without anyone pointing a finger at you. It's just you watching, but also learning. You start recognizing patterns like, that reaction always leads to more problems. That silence is actually making things worse. That pride is blocking something important. And over time, something subtle happens. You begin to catch those same patterns in your own life. Maybe not instantly, maybe not every time, but more than before. And that's powerful, because self-awareness is one of those things everyone talks about, but very few people actually practice. You, on the other hand, are training it without even trying, through stories, through observation, through emotional reactions that reveal more than logic ever could. Of course, it's not always comfortable. Sometimes the reason a character annoys you so much is because they're showing you something you'd rather not look at. And yeah, that can sting a little, but it's also where growth starts, because once you see a pattern clearly, it becomes harder to keep repeating it unconsciously. So no, you're not too invested in these stories. You're using them in a way most people don't even realize is possible. You're turning entertainment into insight, observation into self-awareness, and frustration into reflection. And the next time a character makes a terrible decision and you feel that familiar reaction, instead of just thinking, why would they do that? You might start asking something even more useful. Where does that show up in me? And that question alone can quietly change the way you live your life. The need for meaningful struggle. Here's something strange. You hate wasting time.
Standing in line with no clear reason, delays that could have been avoided. That moment when your internet lags right when you actually need it? Yeah, that one hurts personally. Pointless frustration? It drains you fast. You don't have patience for things that feel random, unproductive, or just there for no reason. But then something interesting happens. Give you a story where a character goes through absolute emotional chaos for 10 plus episodes. Misunderstandings, sacrifices, loneliness, pain that just keeps stacking. And suddenly, you're locked in. No complaints, no skipping ahead, no get to the point already. You're fully invested. Why? Because to you, there's a big difference between random pain and meaningful struggle. One feels like a waste, the other feels like progress. When something has direction, when it's leading somewhere, shaping someone, building toward a transformation, you can handle it. Actually, you don't just handle it, you respect it. And that says a lot about how your mind works. You're not someone who avoids difficulty, you just don't tolerate empty difficulty. You're okay working hard. You're okay going through uncomfortable phases. You're okay being patient when things aren't easy. As long as it makes sense, as long as it's building something, as long as there's a reason behind it. And that mindset, that's a huge advantage. Because a lot of people quit when things get hard, not because they're weak, but because they don't see the purpose. You, on the other hand, can push through longer. You're more resilient in the right situations. You can stay committed when things are slow or uncomfortable. You don't panic the moment things stop being easy. You evaluate. Is this leading somewhere? Is there growth here? Is this temporary? And if the answer is yes, you stay. That's how people build careers, relationships, and skills that actually last. They don't just chase comfort, they tolerate the right kind of discomfort. And you already have that built in. K-dramas just make it more visible. You watch characters struggle, but not randomly. Their pain has weight, it has direction, it leads to change. And without realizing it, you internalize that pattern. You start seeing your own challenges through a similar lens. Not just, this is hard, but what is this doing for me? That shift alone changes everything. Because now, difficulty doesn't automatically mean stop. Sometimes it means continue. Of course, there's still a balance. Not all struggle is meaningful. Some situations really are just draining, repetitive, and not going anywhere. And learning to walk away from those, that's part of your growth too. But once you get that balance right, you become someone who doesn't break easily, someone who doesn't run at the first sign of discomfort, someone who can sit in the middle of uncertainty and still move forward. So no, you're not impatient. You're selective. You don't want less effort. You want effort that matters. You don't want an easy life. You want a life that makes sense. And in a world full of distractions, shortcuts, and meaningless noise, that mindset quietly puts you ahead.
The empathy reflex. You've probably found yourself defending a character that everyone else hates. You're watching with friends and someone goes, "I can't stand this person." And you're like, "Okay, but did you see what they went through?" Not because you think they're right, not because you agree with their decisions, but because you understand why they are the way they are. You don't just look at behavior, you look through it. You naturally ask questions like, what happened to them? What are they reacting to? What are they not saying out loud? And that changes everything. Because most people stop at the surface. They see actions and immediately judge them, good or bad, right or wrong. You go one level deeper. You look for the cause, and that's a powerful instinct. It means you don't jump to conclusions as quickly. You give people context, you leave space for complexity, and in real life, that's rare. K-dramas strengthen this even more. They constantly show you different perspectives. One episode, you're rooting for someone. A few episodes later, you understand the villain. By the end, you realize everyone had a reason. That kind of storytelling trains your brain. You get used to holding multiple perspectives at the same time. You stop seeing people as one-dimensional. And over time,
That carries into your daily life. You stop reacting to people at face value. You start interpreting them. The coworker who seems rude may be overwhelmed. The friend who pulled away may be dealing with something they haven't shared. The person who overreacted may be triggered by something deeper. You don't excuse everything, but you understand more, and that makes you someone people feel safe around. Because when they talk to you, they don't instantly feel judged. They feel seen. You listen differently. You respond with more care. You create space for people to be honest, even when it's messy. That builds trust. And trust, that's one of the most valuable things you can have in relationships. It also makes you a better communicator, because when you understand where someone is coming from, you can respond in a way that actually reaches them, not just reacts to them. That's a huge advantage in friendships, relationships, even work environments. You navigate people better. You resolve conflicts more smoothly. You avoid unnecessary drama because you see the full picture. But there is a cost, because the more you understand people, the harder it becomes to ignore what they're doing to you. You can see the reasons behind someone's behavior and still feel the impact of it. You might think, I get why they did that, but it still hurt. And that's where things get tricky, because empathy can sometimes make you stay longer than you should. It can make you tolerate things that aren't actually okay just because you understand them. So your real strength isn't just empathy, it's learning how to balance it, understanding people without losing yourself in the process, caring without overextending, seeing the reasons without ignoring the reality. Once you figure that out, your empathy stops being something that drains you and becomes something that elevates everything around you. You don't just connect with people, you understand them in a way that most never will. And that's a rare kind of power.
The atmosphere collector. Long after a show ends, you don't always remember the plot. Ask you what happened in episode 7, and you might hesitate. Was that the business deal, the misunderstanding, the dramatic hospital scene? But ask you how it felt. Oh, you remember that instantly. The silence of a certain scene. The weight of a moment that didn't need words. The way the soundtrack slowly kicked in and suddenly everything felt 10 times more intense, or weirdly comforting. It's like your brain saves the vibe first, and the details later. And honestly, that's not a flaw. That's a different way of processing the world. Your mind doesn't just store events. It stores emotional textures, the atmosphere of a place, the tone of a conversation, the feeling you had at a specific moment in time, even if you forgot what was actually said. You don't just experience stories, you absorb them. And that gives you a unique advantage, because while most people remember what happened, you remember how it felt. That makes your memories richer, more vivid, more alive. You can revisit a moment just by recalling the emotion attached to it. A song plays, and suddenly you're back in a specific phase of your life, a certain weather, a certain mood, a certain version of yourself. It's like your memory has built-in time travel. And this doesn't just apply to shows. It shows up in real life, too. You pick up on atmosphere quickly. You walk into a room and feel the energy before anyone says a word. You can tell when something feels warm and welcoming, or tense and off. That helps you navigate environments better. You know where you feel comfortable. You know when something feels right or slightly wrong. And that awareness, it influences your decisions in subtle but powerful ways. You choose places, people, and situations not just based on logic, but based on how they feel. That often leads you to better experiences, more aligned ones, because you're not ignoring your internal signals, you're listening to them. K-dramas just amplify this ability. They're built on atmosphere. The lighting, the music, the pacing, the silence, it's all intentional. And over time, you start noticing those elements more. You become more sensitive to mood, more aware of emotional tone, more connected to the invisible layer of experiences.
and that makes your inner world incredibly rich. Of course, there's a small downside. Sometimes a feeling sticks longer than it should. A scene, a memory, a moment, it lingers. Not because it was logical, but because it felt something. But even that has value. Because for you, feeling is what makes something real. Not just facts, not just outcomes, but the emotional imprint something leaves behind. And that changes how you live. You don't just chase achievements. You chase experiences that actually mean something. You don't just want things to happen. You want them to feel right. And in a world where a lot of people are disconnected from their own emotions, you're deeply connected to yours. Which means your life isn't just a sequence of events. It's a collection of moments that actually meant something. And that's what makes it unforgettable. If you're not subscribed, you'll probably never see us again. But if you are, congratulations, you're growing every day.